Hey folks, and welcome to Let's Talk. This is my show where I sit down with subject matter experts and or people well-versed in a certain topic in tabletop, and we editorialize, give our opinions, and generally discuss the comings, goings, and current hot news. Now, this isn't necessarily as G-rated as the rest of GMG, so viewer and listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. I am here with Ridvan, also known as Scary, and he is the host of Scarredcast, a Warhammer 40k competitive coaching and gameplay YouTube channel. And you also have a Patreon where you do some private sessions with people, teaching them how to play competitive 40k. So playing in all the very different formats. You're kind of an expert on sort of the current ways that the game is played differently. So you've been to the ETC. I think you coached Team Canada.
I didn't coach. I played.
You played Team Canada. Was it Clarence a coach?
Conrad was a coach.
Conrad was a coach. Okay.
Conrad was a coach this year.
It was this year, yeah.
Last year.
Because Clarence has been before as well, my buddy Clarence Lee. You've played in a variety of different tournaments, and you also run the Berry Bash, which is your big local sort of like major. Is it considered a major?
It is a major in the ITC.
In the ITC
was,
now?
I believe, the first Canadian major ever on the ITC, just saying.
La-di-da. So, what's the other? Is the Capital C Bloodbath one as well?
So, Capital C Bloodbath is probably the biggest. The CTC is a new one.
Right.
Then we've got a couple in Vancouver. There's like Attack X, which is a big one.
Right.
And the West Coast. No.
West Coast?
West Coast.
West Coast.
GTC. I'm pretty sure that's in Vancouver. I could be wrong.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So anyway, compared to my like 15 to 20-year-old competitive 40k knowledge, Ridvan is definitely the one to talk to when it comes to the current meta, what's going on. And why is it dominating the conversation in wargaming? Why is it that when you see people talking about wargaming, you get to the news cycle, news media, the most prolific thing, obviously, is, I guess, the world's biggest miniature wargame. And that can be debated, of course, in the comments. You guys are all going to fight over whether or not that's true or not now. Is it the biggest game? Your local meta may represent differently. But certainly from like, I think probably a dollar value sold through retailers and a just conversation online in local gaming stores, in my experience, it is still the dominant sort of like player pool in miniature wargaming. And so I wanted to have Ridvan on so we could talk about basically two big things. So why is that right now? And where do we feel like it's going? Because some interesting things have happened recently. Workshop just announced a big grand tournament in Dallas for North America, which would be the first time there's been a official big competitive play event in North America. And the format is somewhat different. It's Eternal War 1750, which is different from sort of the current popular ways of playing the game. And sort of, I guess the other half is, with all these various formats, how do you feel like the game currently sits? Like, where is it at? So tell me, what's your current sort of like 40K experience? What is the big thing everyone's playing format-wise? And where is the game sort of like meta-wise? Right.
So in competitive 40k, in terms of competitive 40k, Ash and I were talking about how there's like these homebrew sort of formats, which are the 2 to 3 main formats. So there's a couple of big tournaments, especially in the US, that use the specific tournament format. Like Adepticon has its own format, Nova has its own format, but more and more we're seeing an adherence to the ITC championship missions, which are a format that was created by Frontline Gaming that sort of brings in a lot of different formats from some of these big events like Adepticon, like Nova, and kind of amalgamated them into a very streamlined, simple tournament format.
Did you say it's simple? Because I've tried to play the ITC and there's a lot of bookkeeping. There's a lot of bookkeeping.
It's the bookkeeping. It's very user friendly. Okay. Kill something, hold something, kill something, hold something, kill something, hold something.
Every turn.
Every single turn.
Right.
So it's the only thing you really need to worry about. And then the secondaries, which are 15 different ones, you get to pick 3 per game, just based on what you're facing against or what your army does well. So most of them are based around killing things, whether it's tanks or characters or infantry.
Right.
Some of them are holding things like recon, getting into different table quarters or whatever.
Or holding a button.
Or being right in the middle of the table or things like that, or getting into your opponent's deployment zone. Like that. They're pretty straightforward in terms of format.
Right. In terms of what you're physically doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it is very easy to pick up. So once you've played them a few times, it doesn't really change too much. And what it becomes is skill set on positioning, line of sight blocking, movement, target priority, as well as picking the right secondaries based on who you're playing against.
Right.
Because losing points at the end of the day, if you lose by a point, it could be that one character you didn't kill because you just couldn't get to him or things like that.
So how would you say that is different from, I'm just going to use this for lack of a better term for you listening, normal 40k. So 40k played just directly out of the books that Games Workshop makes and sells. Would you say that composition-wise, if you're going to play normal 40k versus one of these formats, whichever one, take your pick, would you build your army differently to play them competitively? Does it change the way the game is played?
There are a few different factors that kind of go into that. Not just the mission format, but also things like terrain expectations.
So you're just using GW terrain, let's say, versus
exactly.
You're using
so, for example,
ITC
if we're talking about like ITC or Nova format, there's a very big like movement to get a lot of line of sight blocking terrain, and they also like make walls and buildings that are pretty, like you can't see through them, things like that. Whereas historically, Games Workshop's terrain is aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
It looks fantastic. However, it doesn't always provide the best like line of sight blocking or ways to hide or that sort of thing.
Right.
So yes, the armies themselves tend to differ based on the format.
Right.
And when you're playing at a Games Workshop tournament, so in the heats in the UK, a lot of the times you see armies that are either A, designed to blow you off the table in 2 turns because they know you can't hide anywhere, or they're designed to try and survive as much as possible against the army that's going to blow you off in 2 turns.
It's rock versus paper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you'll either see an army with 7 or 8 Eldar flyers versus 180 plague bearers. Right. Right. So, the plague bearers are designed to just not die and hold the line as long as possible to win the Eternal War mission, which is normally hold an objective at the end of the game.
Jam zones and stand there until someone
exactly.
dies, yeah.
And then you've got the Eldar flyer list, and I'm just using these as iconic, like, boogeyman lists.
Right.
That is designed to kill you as quickly as possible.
So it sounds like the format plays a huge role in again, air quotes, what's good in 40k. So whether or not you're playing on, GW terrain, playing standard missions of the rulebook versus playing a format that's obviously encouraging a different both play area style and also different ways of scoring and winning the game, which are more procedural and round based versus all or nothing.
It's more standard,
yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the Eternal War missions and Maelstrom missions really, really fun. Very entertaining. Like Games Workshop puts out a great product.
And there's a lot of procedural ones. I've noticed too. The sorry to interrupt, but the chapter approved has actually added some of that procedural stuff.
100%.
That's the influence of those frontline guys.
And it's one of the things that has been very, very good about 40k competitively is that Games Workshop has been at some of these big events, and they have their kind of toes in the water, and they're kind of seeing some of the crazy stuff us competitive gamers come up with.
Well, I remember right after Adepticon got won by all those flying hive tyrants, the Rule of 3 came in.
Rule of 3 came in real quick.
Which is interesting because that's an example of, and I find this odd because like it or not, the casual players of 40k chase what the competitor players are doing, right?
Yeah.
They will every game you see played in a Games Workshop store, there's like that little bit of you can tell those players in the back of their minds feel like they're playing in a championship game and they want to behave as if that's happening. And I find that really funny, though, that Rule of 3, for instance, comes down from definitely tournament results, and it was needed, I think, in some ways. But that's influencing what people do in the store, too, in their casual play experiences. It's saying never buy more than 3 of anything, which I find very, very strange from like a business perspective.
You want them to buy as many as they
rule.
want,
Yeah,
as a business. Yeah.
And Workshop is definitely well aware that these competitive play formats influence the purchasing patterns of their customers. So that was a crazy one to me, just that we brought it up. Is that Rule of 3 was obviously directly impacted by
the competitive scene.
Yeah.
And then the next one is I kind of lost my train of thought there. But those mission formats and the way they influence the game, they're very, very like cut and dry. So, for example, you play like an ITC Championship mission. There's 6 missions. They're pretty much the same. The only variety there is like the deployment changes.
Right.
But the objectives are set in the same place, things like that. So it takes away a lot of the game mechanic that a lot of the other missions have, where it's like you and I place objectives, and you place one and I place one. And if you're more versed at the game, the player's skill in where to place objectives or how to bunch them up if you're playing a very close combat army, or how to spread them out if you're playing a very fast army. The nuances of the game.
So sorry, I'm confused. So in ITC you don't choose where they go, and you do choose where they go in
regular, like
standard?
in ETC, in regular book missions, like Eternal War, Maelstrom of War, the even something as simple as placing objectives becomes part of the strategy of the
Isn't
game.
that a good thing though?
That's what I'm saying. It's a good
gotcha,
thing.
Okay, yeah,
No, I'm just illustrating the point that it's one of the reasons why we do see a dichotomy between armies and like skill level for like a standardized format that's like fan made versus actually remembering, because a lot of the new players that come into competitive 40k are used to playing ITC, so they get a piece of paper that says these are where all the objectives go, and all you do is roll for deployment. And then you make them play a game like Maelstrom where you go, hey, you get to place your objectives, and they look at it and go, what? Why do you have 4 objectives on your side of the table?
Wouldn't that just differentiate player skill then? Isn't
That's
that a
what
good
I mean.
thing where it stretches out?
I agree. I think that actually helps bring out like player veterancy a bit more when you like understand the game. But it can be frustrating to newer players who are used to plugging into a first-person shooter game or something.
It loads up and they go.
Exactly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's that esports mentality of the battlefield never changes, but the micro selection that I do inside. And I think it's funny because that's the influence of I think that League of Legends, the League of Legends idea format where there's some obvious best combos, and then it comes down to some very almost like micro decisions, like where do I apply shooting, right? Becomes more of the skill base versus how did I select my army, how did I put down the battlefield. It's almost because you do see a lot of very common, like the big joke of the Loyal 32. Where that's a meme now. Like there's literally an army selection.
Or the Rusty 17
or whatever it is exactly.
Yeah.
Where there is a standard selection template for certain things in the game that show up. That in and of itself almost removes player franchise because they're no longer innovating and making choices. Like you're talking about there with the placement of objectives. They're taking something that is acknowledged to be the best, and then at the top of the tables you have several people that all have various minor changes inside those templates, and the skill base becomes in the micro decisions, like where did I apply my shooting this turn, how did I deploy my models, and it seems like there's a finer point on player skill the more decision making leading up to the game is taken away. It's almost like chess. You have no decision making in your deployment and your
and then it's all about the micromanagement
of that stuff,
of the actual stuff. And it's one of the reasons why formats like an Adepticon, where player placed terrain is part of the tournament experience. So before you play, you're putting down the terrain on the table to gain an advantage in game. So that's it's just. There's so many different things in competitive 40k that then influence not only how you build your list, but also how you apply the list that you're building in that format itself. So a good competitive player will always read the format first and kind of know sort of what style of army to sort of build around to capitalize on that format.
Because it sounds like sorry, the 40k one in standard 40k. When we're talking about playing it on 6-foot tables with GW terrain, a lot of the skill is dumped into the list building side, where you're trying to make the most powerful combination of things you can, because there is no line of sight blocking, to just remove the opponent's army as quickly as possible. Because
or not get removed.
Because there's not a lot of impediment between the two, just immediately applying attrition to each other. Whereas there's more of an emphasis in some of these other formats on playing a longer game where things move around and have to apply force basically judiciously, because they have to gain line of sight and gain the ability to then remove that object. So it's like a 2-step process in the fan-made ones versus a 1-step just apply dice basically in the 40k one.
Now, that's not to say that there's no line of sight blocking in Warhammer 40,000.
Your characters can hide.
You can hide. There's also like the modularity of the terrain means that
it could be made that way.
So,
that's a struggle for TOs though, right?
It is.
To be able to buy and build that many kits without just completely bankrupting your spellforce or spending 20 years running tournaments where you can accrue that selection of terrain. That is a huge amount of terrain. I do find that just playing 40k now, when I play it on my GW selection terrain, because I tend to feature GW model kits, the game does feel like it's had its tipping point between turn 2 and turn 3. Like at that point, enough force has been applied to one of the two sides that we've discovered who had the most efficient way of killing each other or surviving. And then from there on, for the last like 2.5 turns until turn 5 or maybe turn 6, if there's a turn 6, we're just kind of running down what the result's going to be based on the scoring and stuff like that. That it's gotten away from one of the two players if there's not a lot of impediment to like being able to see each other.
Yeah, the line of sight stuff is important just because of how deadly the game is.
Right.
If there is a lack of line of sight blocking, like you don't put like a bastion on the table or a couple of bastions or, a Fortress of Redemption or something,
Someone is bought.
Like, exactly.
Right.
Just like, if we're talking like just generic 40k Games Workshop terrain.
Ruins. It's a Sector Imperialis ruins.
Or just buy a bunch of crates, just put a bunch of crates in a big wall. Like you
take
can
3 crates and stack them on top of each other.
Yeah, you can have
and it'll
giant...
hide 2/3 of a night.
Yeah, you can hide big amounts of bodies. You can hide stuff. And then another thing is in mission format, like something with the Games Workshop missions is that a lot of them have very specific ways that you can win them very easily. And I think that also kind of skews the competitive format. When you're talking about like 750 points, Eternal War missions, like there's one mission where there's one objective in the middle.
Relic, yeah.
Well, that's Relic. No, I'm talking the other one.
Yeah.
One objective in the middle that you can hold, but if you're close to it, there's no invulnerable saves.
Oh, yes. I know
right?
what you're
And that, for example, can like just throw a wrench into like an army that's designed to rely on invulnerable saves, like Harlequins.
So you dump conscripts on it, you don't care.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's not only about because all of these missions are also kind of rock, paper, scissors, like from a gaming standpoint. Your army might be really, really good at a specific mission, and even though you made it for the format of killing everything, you could play a mission that's just very tough for you to win.
It's not rewarding you for that.
It's not rewarding you for it, and therefore it kind of provides like a balancing factor when you're looking at it that way.
Interesting. So the next thing I want to talk about is points and point values in war games, because this is a topic that I actually want to do a whole show on.
Get out your pitchforks, folks.
But one of the big so this is another movement I found in 40k is one of the big things that has happened is that they become very obsessive about refreshing the point values every year in the chapter approved book. And 40k in particular, and now that we've highlighted that line of sight is so important and stuff, and maneuvering so important, puts a big emphasis on equipment and the point values of equipment.
Yeah, like every grenade or bolt pistol.
Or las cannon, whatever. They all have individual point costs. So you have to buy everything for a model. A lot of that's been streamlined since 8th edition came out. You've got a lot of things that have just dropped to 0, especially if it's unique. So if they are time saving a little bit on building your army lists, where if you're, let's say, the Valiant, and you're the only guy in the game with the Harpoon, the only guy in the game with the Super Murder Flamer, it's just built into your core point cost, and it's really your accessories that you're paying points for. But there are weapons that are given point values, again, based on the skill of the person carrying them. So like a las cannon for a guardsman is not as many points as a las cannon for a Space Marine. Because it hits
less.
Right?
So it's not worth a plasma gun on a Space Marine is worth more than a plasma gun on a guardsman.
That's right.
100%.
But interestingly, some weapons that auto hit aren't.
Exactly.
So a weapon like a flamethrower or a heavy flamethrower is always worth the same amount of points. Now, I find it really interesting that they are given a point value in 40k because they have variable success rates. Now, I can understand fixed point values or equipment point values for something like Age of Sigmar, where your value of the piece of equipment that you buy never goes up and down. You always hit and wound on a fixed rate. So it's a fixed investment. Whereas in Warhammer 40,000, the value of the thing you're targeting changes the value of the thing you have. So if I fire a las cannon at something that's toughness 9, right? It's no longer as efficient as if I shoot at something that's toughness 8. Now, most things in the game are 8 or less, so a las cannon will typically always wound on a 3+.
Hence why it's so expensive.
Exactly. But it does D6 damage, which means its value now goes down based on whether I'm shooting at something with a wound or more than one wound. So if I shoot a 1-wound model, that is no longer worth, let's say, 30 points. I don't know what I'm putting it on, but let's say 35
Unless you
points.
really, really need to kill that guardsman.
which you might do, exactly. But then the damage, some stat of that weapon becomes wasted.
Yeah.
Right? And if a flamethrower dies before it ever gets to fire, because it can't get within 8 inches for whatever reason, or my opponent's army doesn't let me get within 8 inches of it, is it worth its fixed point rate? So that's what's interesting to me is the obsession with equipment and adjusting costs for equipment versus the idea that these things are always going to be variable in behavior. They're going to hit and wound on potentially different rates, and they're going to have different success based on whether or not there's no splash damage, so different success rates based on the wound value of the thing I'm targeting. And so I guess my question is with point values, and I want you to give me an honest answer. You can think about it for a minute if you want. Are point values relevant if I take 1,500 points of models and my opponent takes 1,500 points of models, the things we select can impact whether or not one army is more efficient than the other. So are points valid if we take the same point value worth of models, but there's clearly a list building element in one of those two armies that makes it almost impossible for the other army to win, right? So if I was to fight, let's say, a competitive play 40k army with Space Marines with bolters, you know what I mean? Like with a fluffy, historically accurate demi-company of Space Marines, you know what I mean? So 10-man squads, they've each got one weapon, they're all different, they're all in rhinos.
Okay.
and I fight, let's say, a 2,000 point army that's whatever the current meta of Lord Discordance and crazy chaos stuff is.
Yep.
If I clearly am outvalued, but we've spent the same points, do points matter? And does tweaking the points matter?
When you're looking at from a competitive point of view, I like the fact that they are actively changing the points, simply because they are taking a look at things that are getting used a lot that do become very efficient or kind of rise to the surface of that efficiency, and then they usually have been adjusting, like over the last year or so, they've been adjusting that point value to either make it less of a automatic take choice based on point value, to kind of mitigate that sort of scenario that you're talking about. And so I do believe that you can use point value to sort of help mitigate how unbalanced something like that could be. But the thing is, it has to be constantly moving. Like, you can't just do it once and then let it be, because by taking the value away from one thing, all of a sudden you're adding value to something else, and then something else kind of like comes out of the blue. So it's like when in Australia they brought cane toads over, and then the cane toads like didn't have a natural predator, and then they
that was rule 3. That's the same with rule 3.
Exactly.
Right? Rule 3, the next best 3 things become good, basically.
So personally, do this experiment at home. Go home and grab your 2,000 point list and just see how many power level it is, right? And you'll notice that a lot of 2,000 point lists are about 100 to 115 power level. It's not that much of a difference,
right?
And and it doesn't matter what equipment you put on them on power level.
Just what you make. That's all that matters.
It's all that matters. It's just so. At a certain point, yes, there are some older books that the power level doesn't really reflect, like the new sort of balancing system. So like Space Marines are crazy over power leveled, for example, based on like what they do. But in that sense, no, it's not as important as you might think. Because if you play a power level game, you play 100 power level, it's about 2,000 points. And to be honest, it doesn't matter what your stuff is equipped with.
Right.
At the end of the day, it'll come down to how do you play with your army specifically. So in your example of Fluffy Demi Company versus Lord Discordance, that's when player skill in competitive play comes into play, where it doesn't really matter. Yes, you take efficient choices if you can. That's fine. But it doesn't matter as much if you're playing to like the specific mission at hand. So if you need your guys to survive and then take objectives at the end of the game, then you try and go second and just run away as much as you can until the end of the game.
So what do you think, follow-up question, what do you think the impact is on point values, and would point values be more relevant if the game wasn't effectively unbound? Because one of the things that I've noticed since 8th edition dropped is in 7th edition and 6th edition, they introduced this concept of Unbound. Just use the miniatures you want and pay the points for them. And people lost their minds. They were like, you can't just take whatever you want. It'll just be one-more combos forever. And in 8th edition, they introduced literally a detachment for every type of unit in the game. And yes, there's a tiny bit of flex tax where you probably have to take something to get the whatever you want to invest the most points into. But effectively the game is now Unbound. There isn't really a structure for what and how you take things. A good example is, as you said, the like Smash Captain 3 Ints of Scouts detachment that everyone takes.
It's a plug-in detachment.
Yeah, plug-in detachment.
Yeah,
or the
Loyal 32, Lorusty 17.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These detachments where you're taking a detachment for a very clear benefit and they become obviously good. Do you think if we went back to either a reduced number of detachments or a more consistent detachment that everyone had to follow, would that make it so that point values could be more relevant? Because right now, one of the things I struggle with point values is because you can just take anything really, and you can take anything in any combination you want with some minor taxation, like I have to have an HQ to have 3 elites or whatever it is. Point values become harder, I think, to dial in, especially for equipment, how crunchy equipment point values are and how often they get changed, because I can skew into high toughness, high armor, lots of guns. I can skew into 600 orc boys. I can skew into whatever through this idea that the game is Unbound, through the idea that I have unlimited choices basically on what I take the most of. I'm never limited in the amount of something I can take.
Yeah.
How do you feel has affected the game basically in this edition, and what do you think? Is it a problem? Like, is it like, I see it as both a wonderful thing, but also the reason why we see skews and we see things like the rule of 3.
Yeah, 100%. So I feel that the game itself is, because of the amount of choice you have, has become sort of self-regulating in a way. And the way that Games Workshop seems to have done this is by giving you bonuses and stuff like that for kind of like putting specific things together. So like obsessions or chapter traits or things like that, or stratagems, that you really want to use or that you really want to take advantage of. So even though you have a lot of options, a lot of the times it's hard to pick what you want because you have so many options. And that sort of becomes a self-regulating thing where now each individual person picks what they like the best for the units that they want to take.
If there's obvious best choices, though, does that
that's
make
the
it
thing.
Self-regulating? Or
it's all, the thing is, the best choices really depends on the supporting elements in competitive 40k. For example, if you want to run a horde of guardsmen that runs up at you, you take catechins, right? But if you want to run like a shooty unit, you take Cadians. So it becomes very much about your play style rather than just taking what's best over and over again. Because your Lord Discordant example, for example, you can take 3 Lord Discordants, but if you take them as Flawless Host, it's very different as if you're taking them as, Black Legion, if you're taking them as, because each different one you run will kind of change how those 3 Lord Discordants play with the rest of your list. So what it's done is if you want a specific detachment to be very particular, like a close combat thing, then you're going to run them with a certain, like, they're going to play differently with one set of obsessions in a detachment to another. And I think this is healthy for the game because it means that you're not seeing the same sort of obsession all the time, unless you're playing Elatok Flyers and you know who you are, all of you.
so I guess my follow up to that though is, how is that affecting point value? So if we're both playing, let's say, a 2,000 point army, and I'm spending 2,000 points on, like I said earlier, a completely legal army made up of a standard detachment of Space Marines, right? So I spent 2,000 points on a single battalion, and I've picked my favorite chapter that they're painted as, and I've taken that. And the points are supposed to make it so that we have an equal chance of winning.
Okay.
But the other player has used multiple detachments, taken them to combine multiple different stratagems from multiple different armies.
Yeah.
Do we still have the same chance of winning? Regardless of player, let's say equal player skill.
Okay, then in that case, no.
So how do points have relevancy in that case?
Points, as I said, is a very relative thing.
Okay.
So because you can't just assume that 2 armies are playing on like a blank table with like no other factors involved.
Well, so, but that is a very common experience, the way we described 40k.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it is. Yes, you can't really hide sometimes, but like, what mission are you playing? Who has first or second turn? You know, what is the composition of your Space Marine army? You know, how much experience do you have? Because yes, it does seem like very despairing a lot of the time, but if you know all the little tricks of your Space Marine list,
right.
If you're using those tricks to the best of the advantage, like if you're playing your favorite chapter and they have one stratagem that's really fun to use and you get to use it effectively against your opponent, even though they kind of had multiple detachments and all that stuff, if you're using maneuvering, moving, best like that, you can still, you know, get an advantage in the game.
But you don't think there's a disparity based, let's say, equal player skill. You don't think there's a disparity in list construction then?
There will always be a disparity in list construction. Like there's...
But if it's equal points, there shouldn't be. That's my question here, my theory here is are points as relevant as people seem to think they are if, because the game allows for complete Unbound, two lists of equal point value can have very obviously different power levels in gameplay?
I do agree with that statement. Okay. I think that, yes, you can have two armies of the same point value that are very different in sort of
if players
game power,
right?
If that makes any sense. So yes, points are a relative term in and of themselves,
right?
Like you're giving an arbitrary number to something based on an arbitrary value,
and its value can go up and down based
on whatever you're playing against. Which is why, you know, you kind of have to transcend that from a competitive standpoint. Like you have to take a look at it and not necessarily micromanage the points, but make sure that what you are taking in a competitive sense sort of complements the general strategy of what you're trying to do.
So what you're taking is mattering more at this
point.
And so having unlimited choice, being able to take whatever you like
is perfect.
Right. It's
because then you can tweak it to what you need.
Right. Okay. So then what happens? So then what happens in the importance of codex construction? Are there codexes that are not necessarily of equal tier? Because if you can take anything from a codex, we've agreed that the game is effectively Unbound at this point. If you can take anything you want from a book, are there some books now that have more advantages than others based on their combo selection or even just availability of support units? Like for instance, Imperium's a big keyword.
Amazing.
Right? And there's you can pull detachments from all over the place and have them fight together.
100%, which is not only lore-wise really fluffy, but also really powerful in game. You've got Imperial Soup, which they call it. You know, you've got Chaos Soup, because you can add like
even Tyranids get an element of that now.
with the Gene Stealers and the Brood Brothers and stuff like that. 100%. You know, they've got
Eldar's a big
Eldari, too, you know, Harlequins and Ari. So there's all these like main Soup factions. And to go back like to the last point of points, I do feel that 2,000 points is too many points for competitive events.
Interesting. Can you expand on that?
I feel like I personally like 1,500 points. I even think 1,750 points is too much.
I think we talked about this actually before.
100%. And it's because of that. I feel like because there's this level of Unbound where you can pick and choose anything you want from any sort of codex, and just as long as you have 3 detachments, you can kind of pick and choose the best options to make the most competitive game that you can, or competitive list.
The best soup.
The best soup. Or even not soup, but if you just want to run all your heavy supports or whatever it is. I feel that at 1,500 points, there is a fine line between making those choices that will help you win the game versus making those choices that will sort of like secretly hamper you. You cannot take all your toys at 1,500 points. And I feel the point disparity that you're talking about becomes less apparent at 1,500 points.
I would definitely agree with that. I've always found that 40k for me is at its most interesting when you can't have everything you want. As soon as you're somewhat limited in the best, most powerful options, the game becomes about you might still stack a stat, let's say. You might still have a dump stat, like my defense isn't that high, my offense is super high, and I'm fairly good at maneuvering. Your armies become more interesting, and I think player skill becomes more apparent when you do have a dump stat, for lack of a better term, you know what I mean? For a thing that you're not doing as efficiently as you could do if you had 500 more points. And then maybe points become more relevant, right? Because I think you're right. The combination of Unbound and the highest point value actually that 40k has ever been played at in any edition. I don't think
Ardboys?
Ardboys in 7th was the only one I think that was 2,000 points.
And it was 2,500 points.
It was 2,500 points. That's
and
right.
it was whatever the heck you wanted to
But what's
take.
interestingly is Ardboys at 2,500, you still got less models than you do now because everything had a higher point value.
True.
Right?
Yeah,
like,
but it was crazy. Like,
no, yeah.
Ardboys was ridiculous.
But 7th edition characters could run into like the 250 point value. And that's like a space.
And they would murder like 1,000 points.
Exactly, yeah. And they could kill almost anything in the game. And like let's say like a Marine squad started at 150. I think they start at 130 now.
Yes.
And like your weapon costs were higher, like your equipment costs were higher. Power sword is 15 points.
Then again, power armor was better back then.
It was true. Well, because it was all or nothing. It was an all or nothing save. Yeah. Which actually, interestingly enough, I personally think made point values more relevant because it either behaved or didn't.
Right. So
right?
you had a more consistent, like either yes or
it's
no.
It's a 3+ or no.
Yeah,
so it's for me, the more consistently something behaves in a game, and it's interesting because people I think don't necessarily see that in Age of Sigmar, but it's one of the reasons why I think point values in Age of Sigmar are much more reflective of the 3 key tenets, I think, in building a list, which is your battlefield presence, how many wounds and what's their save sitting on the table, how much offensive damage can it put out, because the damage never changes. They hit and wound on fixed rates.
100%. And don't even get me started on AOS. I think it's refined 40k.
Like, I do too, absolutely. Yeah.
I think 40k could use a lot of the small nuance elements from Age of Sigmar.
Just splash damage. It would speed
not
the
only
game
splash
up so
damage,
much.
but like, casualty removal and having to stay within coherency with casualty removal. Just little things, simple things. I think make a big difference.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I don't not enjoy playing 40k. I really enjoy playing 40k in very specific like amounts. I can't play too much 40k in a day because I just get like a headache and it grinds on. And because I think I can see typically how the game's going by turn 3 a lot of the time because the way we play it, we play right out of the rule books.
Yeah.
I don't get discouraged, but I just want it to be over at one point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a common feeling. You can talk about it in the comments, but you get to like turn 3 or 2 or 4, and even if I'm winning, I'm just like, I know what's going to happen now. Like we're just rolling dice to end the game. And it's mostly because when I'm making a video, I'm not just going to snap cut the end of the game. Like we know who won now. We're just going to end on turn 3 and
100%.
We're going to run out the clock and do the whole process so people can see the whole process in video. And there are some operations in the game that make it tend to take a long time. Like I can record 3 games of almost any game system except 40k. 40k,
well, it takes like 3 hours to do.
I could do 2 games basically.
Yeah. It's a long time.
It's a long time. And when we even saw that in events, there was a big argument in the ITC about chess clocks. And
chess clocks are becoming more and more not only apparent but like expected at events, simply because of the use of time, in like a competitive scene.
And chess clocks are a skill in and of themselves.
They
are. Remembering to clock back and forth. And it's funny because Owen and I have talked about this before, because he played tons of competitive War Machine.
That's Death Clocks was like.
Well, but playing War Machine on a clock are 2 different entire skills. Like the clock itself is literally a skill, and like clocking back and forth as fast as you can to like bleed your opponent's clock, and trying to kill your opponent with the clock is actually a thing, right? It's interesting to see. So what was, just for people listening, what was the issue? It was taking, you had 2.5 hour rounds? And
it really depends.
But people were only getting to like turn 2 or turn 3.
Yeah, with 2.5 hour rounds. And that was in the early 8th edition, just like all the mechanics that was taking a long time. But now with about 2.5 hours, 2:45, you usually have enough time split 2 ways.
Yeah, there's some armies I find really kill the clock though. So like for instance, like that huge horde of plague bearers you're talking about, as soon as you're shooting like multi-damage weapons into them, every individual casualty so I'm shooting a D3 damage thing into a plague bearer. I have to do a D3. You have to do the right number of resilience saves, then remove that mod, and it has to go back.
Yeah,
and forth
well,
like
there's a lot of ways to speed it up, and you just roll, and then any successes you re-roll. Does it, like if you just do it in pools.
Can you pull that? So like if I shot like a battle can where every hit is D3 damage,
wouldn't
I have to individually resolve them in
technically,
order?
yes, of course. Okay. But to speed up the game with fast dice rolling, you go, okay, I did 6 wounds, and I do 63 damages, 2 or 3s, 4 or 2s, right? So I go, okay, I'm going to roll the 3s. You roll 2 dice, because you had 2 3s. If you roll a 6, you just re-roll it.
Right.
Or a 5. And then you re-roll it multiple times. If you
Would that
need it.
would that generate exactly the same result as doing the
Yeah,
individual?
pretty much.
Yeah. Sorry, I just feel like at that level when you're playing it
Yeah,
competitively, though, people are gonna
statistically
nitpick.
speaking, if you're rolling 3 dice, it's almost the same as rolling 3 dice one at a time instead of rolling 3 dice at the same time.
I agree. Well, so the thing is the discarded damage, right? I guess in a 1 wound scenario, it wouldn't matter if it was a 2 wound model with resilience.
If it's a 2 wound model for resilience, you have to resolve the one. Yeah, so if it's grotesque and stuff, there's ways to mitigate it.
Yeah.
But that's when.
But those mechanics in general bleed time.
If you are the kind of person that runs 160 plague bearers, you better learn how to roll your saves really fast.
True.
Because if not, you're going to run out of time.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't it be on your opponent's clock though?
So
doing the result. Like,
so if I
clock back to do the
if I shoot
saves.
I shoot you and go take 10 saves, I clock to you, and you take your saves.
I'm just saying the clocking back and forth for resilience, if I have like a bunch of 2-win guys with resilient, it would take like forever.
It would take a long time. But they are a very powerful army in terms of resilience. So you're not maybe spending as much time shooting because you don't have any shooting, but you're spending it rolling dice for saves.
Yeah, gotcha. So we've talked about the meta and how that's like influencing things. And the different ways that can be played. We've talked a little bit about point values, and then army construction, and those are 3 big things that get talked a lot about online.
Yeah,
like I would say that of the things that get discussed about 40k, besides painting miniatures, those 3 things in general are the things that get discussed the most.
They do.
How is the game played? Jump from there to how do you make armies in either the format of list construction and how things are pointed out. Where do you see that going now that Games Workshop's announced their own format, right? Their own, like, because we don't know where it's going to go from here. This is all kind of speculation, but they've got their 1750. They've taken it down 250 points
into Texas,
at
their Citadel or whatever. Yeah.
And is that different from Throne of Skulls? What's Throne of Skulls played at for 40k?
1750.
So it is 1750.
Yeah, yeah. So they're just porting over that same format into the U.S. Grand Tournament, the North American Grand Tournament. I can see it gaining traction very quickly,
right? Especially if they market it hard.
Exactly.
If it's the workshop of today, there's going to be a huge marketing push to
the biggest thing will be getting some of the big media outlets in on it as well. Like, of course, Games Workshop is $1 billion corporation. They can kind of
not quite billion,
well,
but yes,
okay,
250 million pounds. Like this.
Okay, close. But they can they're getting there. But the thing is, one of the reasons that we had all these formats kind of sprout from the main rule book of Warhammer 40,000 was because of like the lack of like a format for competitive, an official structure. And I think that as soon as they do put the resources into creating an official structure, we will see a translation from from the competitive community, because you might not like ITC, you might not like ETC. You might just like to go to your local game store where you play regular book missions at your local RTT, whatever it is. But if, like, I like to use AOS as an example. Like, they released a...
it's actually out yesterday when this comes
out. No, I'm talking about like from when they started releasing AOS. There was always a section in the book that had, and the community itself took that format and they sort of ran with it, where you run the realm rules in tournaments and you run like all the little nuances. And
the thing I was mentioning was actually the day before this airs, so yesterday basically, in the time when this will come out. The General's Handbook 2019 has come out, and it has official, like right down to like the schedule and scoring if your opponent shakes your hand or not. There is an official GW tournament pack in here.
That's cool.
And it literally says will be used in all Games Workshop tournaments. So as far as like an official version of this for AOS, as of yesterday, there now is one. Yeah, it's page 70. If you got your General's Handbook open, or you're listening to this and you want to check it out, it's page 70 of the General's Handbook. It says pitch battle tournaments, and it has absolutely everything to organize and run one of these. And it says people are free to use these or a modified version of these in their own tournaments. But these are the official, like there's even a results form, scoring sheet.
Which is great. It reminds me of the old Rogue Trader tournament stuff.
There's painting scoring. But even though you're actually required to bring a painted army, there's like additional scoring for that. Opponents painting, tick all that apply. All models were fully painted with at least 3 different colored base codes.
Tick.
All base codes have shading and highlights.
Tick.
And then all bases were fully painted with at least a base coat, and more than a third had added features like debris or grass.
Very cool.
Then there's also opponent's etiquette. So opponent arrived before the round started for a point.
Yeah.
Opponent shook your hand before and after the game, or offered to do so for 2. That one might be controversial, actually. It's weird that one might be controversial, but I feel like even just like in shaking hands is so not appropriate anymore for some people. I don't know why.
No.
It's super
just
weird.
have your.
I'm just gonna hug it out with everybody.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna do. Be like, hey, what's up? Let's hug it out.
Let's hug.
And then opponent gave you a copy of their roster, and opponent had all the Citadel miniatures, dice, measuring instruments, and rules they needed in order to play the game. And all told, out of your score, so if you get a major victory in this, it's 60 points.
Yeah.
Those are worth 5, 10, 25. 30 points.
So half of you, like a third of your score is which is about right, because you had the old Rogue Trader like packet that they used to give out that had like like all the
rules,
the rules,
the
and
Will
things like
Wheaton
that.
rules for tournaments.
Yeah, and those I still have all those old missions. They were so fun, but and I still play
a lot
them.
of them. What's funny is a lot of those missions too were asymmetrical.
They were very
you had
like
attacker defender missions.
One of my favorite was Trader, where you had to give your opponent one of your elite choices, and they fought against you.
They fought against you, yeah. And then there's 2 schedules in here, so there's a long and a short day schedule, so a 1 day and 2 day schedule. The short schedule format is 3 rounds. The long schedule format is 5. With like a 2-day roster, basically.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't be surprised, because this is coming out in June, if there's not going to be an official one in the next chapter.
But that's the thing. If there's something like that for 40k, I could see the community rallying behind something like that.
Because it's all of a sudden in a book that you have to buy.
It's it's supported by the company that creates the game that we love.
Right.
And that alone, that stamp of like approval means that you will end up playing with it.
Right. Because I think I said it earlier, is every game played in every store everywhere is played like it's a championship game in their heads.
That's right. We all want to win. We all want to
But it means you adopt the format, because every game's a practice game
Mm-hmm.
for that championship game you're someday going to play. Mm-hmm. Right. Every game of Donkey Kong is going to make you the King of Kong. So it's that getting ready for like the someday Karate Kid moment where you're going to do the crane for you're going to
go out,
beat Cobra Kai.
You're going to go to one of these giant tournaments and you'll be at the top table.
But I think the more in people's faces, if it's in chapter approved, just like it is in the General's Handbook now, the more people are going to want to assume that's the way most things are going to be. So I think I think what'll probably happen is the pressure will actually not come, I think, from these big GW tournaments that are going to get run. It's going to come, like you said, from the small tournaments who don't know anything about running tournaments.
And they'll just open the book, and it's like a store owner that's like, I wonder how to run it.
It comes from underneath.
Exactly. It's like a grassroots thing.
Yeah.
And I think that the only reason it will really work is because Games Workshop right now has a policy of like community involvement, and they have had, going back to that initial point where they have their toes in that competitive meta, if they continue to sort of test the waters out,
right,
and then they use that as like a living rulebook style thing where the format does evolve and does adapt, and they find kinks in the format and are okay, doubling back on a mistake they've made, and then like putting out and then not just letting it lie stagnant.
Yeah.
Right. If they do that, I think it could be very, very, very successful.
And if it's an annual thing, which obviously with both of these books, it's become an annual thing. I feel like the customers and the players have become a bit more forgiving and flexible because they know it's only going to last a year. If something bubbles to the top as being not broken, because it's really hard to break a game with dice involved. It becomes it becomes a thing that is acknowledged. This too shall pass. Right?
Yeah,
there will be 365 days of this, and then at some point it's going to be acknowledged, and we're going to make a change that's going to just literally put all the toys back in the box and shake them up and put them back out. Because I honestly think for a lot of people, especially in competitive play, the longer something goes on for, the less interested they become in the game. Whereas if things are constantly in flux and changing...
Well, that's why 40k right now is crazy.
Well, we've reached the end of codexes, though.
Yeah, now they're adding little things in that are spicing up the game.
Yeah, it's vigilous changing the game.
And they're changing that dynamic, and it's really, you might see, a lot of chaos at the top of the events, but each chaos list has its own twist and its own, flavor. And I think it's only because of that.
Until the next thing comes out.
Exactly, 100%. So it too shall pass.
Right. Which
is funny seeing, you and I have been playing the game for a long time. All these people complaining or necessarily like noticing some competitive trends like Eldar flyers and things like that. Like, well, you don't remember Rhino Rush or,
Rhino Rush, deep friggin' Land Raiders and Blood Angel armies.
Yeah, or all these things that at that time would have been a little bit more of a plague on the competitive scene for a lot longer than it will be right now.
Yeah,
because they would have cemented themselves for a good amount of time, as it wasn't a cycle.
Well, you were talking about 4 codexes a year.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Exactly.
Probably 3 codexes a year.
And that's why
8 codexes a year, 10 codexes
or whatever
a year,
it is, and
plus tweaks,
plus
for
white
like
dwarfs, plus
dwarf,
FAQs, plus all this stuff
and campaign books. Because it's
it's
interesting. Having played the game as long as I have, one of the things I've noticed is that the 4-year cycle for an edition of the game, it has a sort of like number of periods. So like the beginning of 8th edition, we had just obviously all the
indexes
books.
And stuff. Yeah.
And then they rush to get all the major players out and to get all those codexes released. And we're in the end cycle of that now, where it's just sisters left.
Yeah.
It's the ones that didn't really have a codex even going into this that are left as the codex to end the edition with. And then we've started they've done this with the end of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. They've done it with basically the last 2 editions of 40k. Which were 1 edition because 6th and 7th got a 2-year.
It was like 1.5.
It was very strange. It went from added. So what happened is halfway through that release cycle, they added Lords of War into the main game.
Yeah.
They added big giant monsters. They added the Baneblade and stuff. But now we're into the campaign books, and the campaign books usually signal the beginning of the end of an edition.
Yeah.
Because they give out toys to everyone who's had their codex for a while now.
Yeah.
And then they start to move the story into whatever the next phase of the story is going to be.
Yeah.
And so we've got the Vigilus campaign right now, where it's 2 books, and there might be another campaign book, not set on Vigilus, obviously, but another whatever the end time.
Yeah, that kind of fits in all the.
Is.
I'm assuming all the stuff that didn't really get touched on in Vigilus.
Right.
Yeah.
So has Vigilus fallen? Where do we go to next? What's the next big crisis? 12 minutes to midnight. That 40K is facing. And we're in 2019 right now, so we are hitting and June actually, because it was June 2016 that 8th edition I think came out.
It was.
So we are 1 year away.
Was it 2016? Really?
Yeah.
Holy moly!
So we're 1 year away from
that's crazy.
The 4-year cycle ending.
Yeah.
And it looks like we're about into the last year of releases for 40k. So down into competitive 40k talk. What do you think? What's your prediction for the next phase cycle for 40k? Where do you think the story's going to go and the next jump is, basically?
You think for the next... I think, as historically speaking, I feel like they will be porting over a lot of the structures from Age of Sigmar into 40k.
Think so?
Maybe not necessarily. Like, there's some very clear design differences, like, you still roll to wound based on strength and toughness instead of having like a set number, things like that. But I could see them doing things like the small things like the casualty removal,
total damage, then remove models.
Another thing is the damage. Age of Sigmar missions for match play are one of the best designed missions for gaming formats.
They're all progressive.
They're all progressive, and it has some really cool elements. Like if when you hold an objective, it stays as yours until somebody else takes it from you. So I think elements like that, adding them into 40k, not having to leave a unit to babysit an objective or something like that'll change the dynamic of the game. I feel that with the addition of with them opening the door to using White Dwarf again for rules, I can see them really exploring a lot of the subcultures and a lot of different stuff that isn't in main codexes. Mm-hmm. But I think that we're going to see some streamlined, say, competitive format stuff that will be in those books. Like I could see them using that template that they've been putting out with the General's Handbook, and then sort of conglomerating all the mistakes they made, and then kind of putting it out as 40k.
There does seem to be three much more clearly defined lines between open play, narrative play, and match play in AOS, whereas in 40k, there is stuff being made for narrative play and open play. Yeah, but it doesn't get talked about very much.
It doesn't, and if you play narrative play, you normally play narrative match play. Like you play narrative missions, but you still use match play rules like points or only using one stratagem, things like that. I could also see a revamp of the command point system and the stratagem system to be very similar to the Age of Sigmar system, where you're kind of gaining command points.
Buy them by what you
exactly.
Take.
So you kind of save them up throughout the game and then use them when you need them instead of having them.
It's a trickle in as opposed to having a pool that just shrinks.
Exactly.
And there's no real recycling.
Yeah, yeah. So I feel like they could do something similar to that. Of course, it's just guessing. Like you never really know.
There is. I think that's an interesting one to talk about, especially the command points, because right now purchasing command points to execute your wombo combo,
combo.
But it's literally what it feels like. It feels like one of those Tekken combo strikes where you've built up your power bar,
up, down,
and then but then you explode someone with this huge combination of moves,
and then you vect it.
And the more you can buy command points, the more times in the game you can do that.
Yes, 100%.
You can influence the game. And then if you can also recycle them as stealing from your opponent, whatever your relics let you do, that's just further increasing the power level of your army through unit selection rather than having to pay points for it.
Yeah, I feel like I would hope that there's some tweaking with some of the detachments as well, namely the fortification detachment. I feel like they should kind of add that in to like a fortification slot.
Like the flyer slot.
To like a battalion or brigade. Yep. I could see them adding in a lot of these terrain features like they have in Age of Sigmar to be like, you get this terrain feature with your army.
Yeah, because you pay points for most of the factions right now. Like the Mechs Workshop, you pay points for.
Yeah, right now any of those fortifications that are like specific to a faction, you are paying for them.
You don't just get them; you're choosing.
Exactly. So
and there's definitely an impact on sales of those things if they're free.
Yeah.
And Workshop being
then everybody
everyone has one. You literally have to. Well, I mean, the last 2 or 3 battle tomes that didn't get a lot of units, they got endless spells and a piece of terrain. And everyone had bought them because it was just stuff you could all of a sudden use in your army.
Yeah, you just use it. Like a Harlequin army with like a Webway gate, all the time. That makes sense because they're Harlequins, like that sort of thing. So.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's certainly, like you said, there's some ability to differentiate detachments too. So like if for instance you could take a fortification with a spearhead detachment because they're heavy, but you don't get one with an outrider detachment because they're mobile. That would make sense to me, right? Like it would add some differentiation and value into certain types of detachments. Now, one of the things I doubt will happen is I doubt the codexes will not be backwards compatible. I almost guarantee that whatever codexes are currently out, they're not going to re-release all the books again.
No, they'll just kind
of. So that's going to limit what they can do core game-wise, changing the core game.
Well, they have kind of set a precedent by re-releasing the Chaos Codex to Chaos Codex version 2.0 with like all the added Vigilus stuff, and I could see them doing something similar. Like if they've just done a compendium essentially of all the chaos stuff into one spot.
Well, so what I'm talking about is that if stratagems all have a different CP cost, it would be hard to reduce that to a trickle all of a sudden if you have like 3 CP stratagems that are really hard to execute.
Yeah.
Because you're some of the inherent ways that stratagems work in the current books would prevent you from being able to change
that mechanic of the game.
Used. Exactly. Yeah.
So maybe that doesn't change, but maybe the way that you generate them or things like that could change.
Yeah. It's the same with weapons and stuff, because you'll have to use the rubric for weapon damage if they're keeping the codexes, because all the weapon stats are still printed in the book. So I would be optimistic that some of those things would change.
Unless they re-index everybody.
Yes, which I don't know if they can get away with that twice in one edition. They went, because think about it, they went from 4th edition until 7th edition
without really changing anything.
Without core changing the game.
Yeah.
So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 4 editions of the game. Actually, even 3rd edition.
Third was very similar to 4th.
3rd through 7th, where the codexes were backwards compatible.
Yeah.
Where the game didn't change so fundamentally.
No. Well, I used the same Dark Eldar book for 13 years. Yeah. I know.
Even when a new one came out, he kept using the old one. Just for no reason. You and your old original. I have a bucket full of old Dark Eldar models. They're not one of the things I am nostalgic for.
I painted an old Vect, like the old Dace with like, and that was one of the most entertaining paints I've done for a while. Just classic.
I still have Skin Face Lightning Claw Lord, where he's just like
I'm wearing your face on my face, Lord. Yeah.
So bad.
I love it.
He's one of those miniatures that's so classically bad that you have to be okay with it.
You have to.
Or the old grotesques that were just like kind of half falling down. Yeah. There were some good. The old Incubi were okay though.
Actually, they're one of my favorites. Nice. Yeah. Bring back my.
No, they were Chris Fitzpatrick, I think. Sculpts.
Yeah, their helms were very iconic, and then their Punisher, their big.
Because they were the dark side of Striking Scorpions.
They were, yeah.
That's what they looked like.
Yeah.
Because they were the mantis instead of the scorpion. So I think that's pretty much it. We've wound down. We're now waxing philosophical. So I want to give a big thank to Redvon for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
And of course, we'll show a little bit for your coaching service and your Patreon.
Yeah, just on YouTube. You know,
go check out Scardcast.
Everything's on there.
If you're interested in 40k, played it a very different way than I play it. Which is to say, go and check out
Hey, we had a
channel.
game before. That was fun.
We did.
Yeah.
The thing is that I'm so excited to paint 40k armies, but then when it comes to playing 40k, I become, like I said, deflated because I'm playing just out of the book right now.
Yeah.
Playing by turn 3 or turn 4.
Don't you
the
play
game's gone on for so long.
You know, you'd really like the there's a German format which is
Right.
1250 points, 1 battalion Highlander.
See, that's just the way I would play the game.
That's what I mean. That's how you.
I think that. Well, I mean, and this
It's
is
just
my
a
hope for the
fun
future
format.
is playing at like 1500 points with either a single detachment or a detachment plus. Because I still like the idea of being able to take allies.
Yep.
But like, let's say the only other detachment you can take after you pick your primary is like the patrol. You know what I mean? Because then you can have some troops. You can have kind of one of everything if you want.
And have like
but
a little
there's no
ally.
CP benefit.
Yeah.
It's not gaining you like a Lord of War or something like that.
Makes sense.
That's okay for me. And then was the auxiliary when you pay a CP for. I think that one's fine too because it would let you take like an Inquisitor or an Assassin.
Yeah.
You know, you can have your Inari like big. What's that guy's? The big not Avatar, the Death Avatar. He can go and
The
hang out with
Incarn.
whatever, the Incarn.
Although you can put him in a Drukari or Eldar detachment now,
Of course.
without becoming Inari anymore.
There you go. All
There
right.
you go. You could just do that.
Those are the kind of formats I think would be fun. It's not that I don't enjoy playing 40k. I do enjoy playing 40k, but what happens is the expectation of how you play 40k
100%.
changes for every person that comes in for me. So some people play
Well, for
casually,
everybody.
some people play at ITC, some people.
Yeah.
I actually would be really excited if we are looking at the future of
And it's just in a book.
more standardized detachment
Yeah.
where it's in a book, because for me it's exhausting not playing the game, but keeping up with how every person I encounter plays the
Yeah.
game. I have to adapt to their play style, and my play style isn't necessarily
The same.
not even the same, but just even compatible.
Yeah.
Right? Where we get blowout games really quickly because I'm not playing the game in that format.
Yeah.
And so that's where my whole idea of like point values not mattering comes from, because we're playing the same point value game, and clearly my army
Was
is
not
designed
optimized
to
play each other,
whatever
yeah.
we were coming in.
Well, an easy way to, like, for everybody out there who wants to play at, like, whatever level you want to play, narrative, competitive, friendly, pickup games, just have, like, a 2-minute conversation with opponents before you
What your
put your
expectations
armies.
are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the best way to have a very enjoyable game is to be on the same page.
That's
first
true of
all.
everything. But
Yeah.
I think my hope for the future for 40k is that at some point your selections become less impactful on the results of the game off table, and become more focused on your selections and your choices you're making on the table.
I agree.
And because that's for me the best possible game is we show up with anything, and the game is determined more by what we do on the table versus
Right.
what we did leading up to it.
Yeah.
You know, our knowledge of the current meta and the current wombo combos or whatever.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it there. So big thanks for listening and for tuning in and watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, there will be another one of these next week on Sunday. So big thanks again for Redvon coming in, and
No problem.
you guys for listening and watching. Next time I'm Ash. Have a organized.